but it's also a really dangerous time for folk horror.
Yeah.
And I had this conversation last week at the Ghosts conference where we're talking about the annexing of folklore by far right groups. I spoke to a friend of mine from Belgium who's very interested in folklore, but said it is a very problematic time for folklore in Belgium, where folkloric motifs and stories are being annexed and being retold. But because when you look at folk horror itself, sorry, you've just gotten me started,
No, continue.
flowering, the first official flowering, as it were, because there are lots of ancestries of folk horror of the 60s and the 70s.
Yep.
But even in that first flowering, it's quite colonial. It's the innocent outsider who's actually a representative of this colonial world going into an othered kind of community. And it is a great vantage point from the writer. But I think that the folk horror that speaks to me most at the moment is the folk horror that's coming from inside the tent, if that makes sense. So I'm more country than Lovecraft.
Lovecraft absolutely praise his writing. I think he's phenomenal, but there is definitely a case for updating Lovecraft to remove some of the more problematic parts of it. I think we need the original because we need to understand how people thought back then. But I think as modern writers, let's move on and produce something that's slightly more ethical.
I'm massively in favor of cultural sensitivity and thoughtfulness, but I'm also no fan of going back and trying to rewrite stories. No. That's super problematic because I think it's a consequence of the world that we live in, where social media is such knee-jerk reactions to everything. I grew up in an era in Ireland where my only reflection of the Irish experience, apart from some Irish writers that we studied in school, some great Irish short story writers like Frank O'Connor or Sean O'Faolain, but they weren't modern writers. So when it came to the Irish experience, it was always through the lens of usually the English or the American lens, where it was often very derogatory. It was like the jolly top of the morning kind of leprechaun or the stereotype of the drunken Irishman. But something, as a kid, I read that and I thought, nah, there was no equation between that and the world around me. So I think sometimes we do people a disservice that we feel that they can't recognize these things. I think that we can.
I also think I should clarify, I was absolutely not talking about rewriting original works